Now Lord Stockton, Conservative Prime Minister from 1957 to 1963, 90 years old,
My Lord,
on his feet.
I hope it will not be thought impertinent of me, as a very new boy in your Lordships House, to extend my congratulations to the Bishop of Birmingham. I've recently passed through the ordeal of a maiden speech, and I know how pleased he must be to have got over that hurdle. He can certainly feel happy that both in matter and in manner he has made a most distinguished contribution to our debate. My Lord, we have in this motion drawn in very wide, if somewhat Pecksniffian terms, almost a range of subjects which one would allow one to talk about almost any social or economic question. But I propose, with a short time to delay your Lordships, to refer mainly to the matters which are mostly in our minds of unemployment and industrial revival. So, of course, we've been through all this before. 63 years ago, I went to Stockton-on-Tees to stand for Parliament. The unemployment figure was then 29%. Last November, I went to a party there of my friends. The unemployment is 28%. Rather sad end to one's life. That's what's happened. And whatever the noble lord, my noble friend, who spoke so admirably, the best defense of the government I've ever heard made, may say about the standard of consumption in these areas which are suffering from this terrible unemployment. That is largely because, whereas 60 years ago the unemployed were kept on a poor law basis, they are now happily treated with much greater liberality. Nevertheless, the facts remain, and we have come, the circle has come, the wheel has come full circle. After the First War, the economic recession struck the world 4 years after the end of the war, 1922. And it lasted really until rearmament and the Second War. The problem was never solved. Let's be frank about it. Everybody had all kinds of different views which are now repeated today. Some of them have said that it was all objected, and I think myself rightly, to the return to gold and the parity of the pound at $4.86. $4.86. Return to gold, I think, was a good idea, but not at that parity. And that was, of course, another forced from the government of the day, rather against the willingness of the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mr. Churchill, by the whole financial establishment, the bankers, the Bank of England, what are called the experts, the writers in financial papers, all that great world of commentators who always know what is best, but forget happily later what it is they have recommended. Well then, there was the same argument about expansionism or restrictions. My friend, one of my oldest and dearest friends, Lord Keynes, represented, although not in the way he's supposed now to have done, in a moderate form, an expansionist policy. And that was, of course, opposed by the government. You can almost hear the same phrases in the House of Commons and in your Lordship's House that we had 50 years ago. And now, happily, after the Second War, the great industrial reaction did not take place. I rather expected it. I think many of us expected it. Whether it was the Korean War, which gave a boost to the economies of Europe, or whether, I think largely because the generous act of martial aid allowed the nations of Europe to buy what they needed from the products of Britain. And anyway, it didn't come. Of course, we all said how clever we have been in avoiding unemployment. We all do that. When it goes against us, it's of course the inevitable forces of world powers and so on. But it is all right. And then, 10 years ago, it went wrong. Not here only, all over Europe, all over the capitalist world. Was it the sudden rise in the price of oil? Enormously put up the costs of manufacture, with terrible results upon the third world, which found it impossible to buy what it needed or to sell its own exports of raw materials. We do not know. It came at us. It's interesting to see how exactly the same arguments have been reproduced and the same sort of action taken. When it struck the Labour government in the first case, they naturally followed what I think are called neo-Keynesian policies. That is to say, a reasonable amount of reflation, putting in money into the infrastructure, as it is called, and all the rest of it, and of course, having to put so much more money into the system, they had to invent a restrictive policy of restraint on wages and on prices to try to present this money producing an impossible inflation. They were not successful because, as we know well, these price policies and wage control policies do not succeed. They just make up a great dam which, when it bursts, is worse than before. Well, then they went out of office. Everything was very bad. The pound had gone down some terrible figure. Was it $2 or something like that? But at any rate, it was very low. And they were driven out of office. Well then, next the Conservative Party came in, with of course the revival of the restrictionist system, which meant to cut off all possible expenditure, raise bank rate to 18%, they did at first, by way of encouraging manufacturers like me. And then gradually, one must give them this great credit, sacrificing almost everything to perhaps the first need, I'm not saying it wasn't, of stopping the runaway inflation, which would have ruined us and destroyed the whole social structure of our people. That ended up. But it's been a very high cost. Now the argument goes on, backwards and forwards. Might I ask your lordships, just for a few minutes, I venture to keep them, to look at another country which had the same problems, people very similar to us, which I'm proud to claim I'm half descendant. I mean the United States of America. 4 or 5 years ago, when the rather depressing reign of President Carter came to an end, they were very much in the position that we were in. The economy was depressed, unemployment was very high, terribly high, 1 in 8. The economy was falling. Seemed to be not much hope. And then President Reagan did a very wise thing. He dismissed all the academic economists from Washington. And said to himself, well, this is absurd.
Grandson there listening on the steps.
Let us look at the realities. Let's not talk about juggling with money. Let's look at the realities, the creation of wealth. That is what we must do today. Happily for him, unhappily for us, the monetarists were the first to be exiled. They were received, of course, with that courtesy that we always receive refugees. They are settled in Oxford, in Cambridge, in Whitehall, and in his room and even in Downing Street. But they've done infinite harm, because they've diverted our attention from what is really happening. What is really happening is that the third industrial revolution is on its way. The first, based on steam, on coal and steam brought the great strength of the 19th century, with all its weaknesses as well, but still its strength. The second, which began at the end of the century, the turnover from coal and steam to oil and the internal combustion engine, meant the motor car, the aeroplane, and the container ship. Whole complete revolution, all forms of production, transport. I was interested to hear my noble friend say that, quote, Mr. Gladstone saying that the chief object of, one of the chief objects of government was to allow reduced taxation in order to allow the money to fructify in the pockets of the people. I've long thought, I'm not surprised, I've long realized that the great figures in my old party have long ago given up Toryism and have adopted Manchester liberalism of about 1860. But apart from that, all this is completely out of date. But what have the Americans done? They've tackled the problem at its base. They've been the protagonists in invention, first in invention, in development, and in exploitation of the new technology. Yeah. They've done that on an immense scale. And what is interesting is that they have reduced at the same time as this is going on, unemployment by the means of the new wealth created. They've made 5 million new jobs altogether. The old plants don't employ more people. General Motors don't employ more people. Of course not, fewer, because they've gone largely automatic. It's the new plant, the new methods, and all that goes to build them, and the new wealth built under them, and the new service industries that spring around them. Nor is it only in the field of atomic physics. It's the extraordinary biological developments which are going on there too, which are going to revolutionize the whole structure of the world. And we're somehow out of it. Of course, many of our leading, able industrialists are taking a full part, but not most of us. They're hardly conscious of it. Speak about the depressed areas. What was remarked northeast coast? Shipbuilding, iron and steel, coal. Will they ever come back? No. The shipbuilding, that kind of shipbuilding is finished. It will be the container ship, which we were so slow to press forward and our harbour so foolish in many cases to reject. Let any of your lordships really reflect for one moment. Supposing, by the wave of a magic wand, in one night, all our plants and all our industrial production could be brought up to the level of the best, what would be the result? Another 1 million unemployed. I should say another 2 million unemployed. Because they would all become capital intensive and they would all employ less labor. The only hope, either we can sit by and do nothing, and then we shall just become an obsolete country. A nice place for tourists, but an obsolete country. Or we shall take part, and a leading part, in this which cannot be altered. The first industrial revolution wasn't brought about by governments, it just happened. It had terrible, harsh results when it took the loom and the warp from the cottage and put the people into these factories. It had terrible results when under the aegis of men who were good Christian men, but dominated by dogma, in light of non-interference by the government, allowed children to work 12 hours in the factories and 12 hours underground. It had bad results. But in the long run, by the end of the century, the simple test is this. Real wages and salaries had doubled, and in many cases tripled. In other words, the standard of living of the mass of the people for a great bit of history. The second industrial revolution, aided on by 2 wars, has had similar dramatic effects. And the third, which is bound to come, is creeping forward. Our question is, are we to be in it or to wait until we fall behind? My noble friend, who made such an admirable defense of the government, spoke of some of the good signs. Exports increasing by some percentage in the last few months. Well, of course, if you halve the value of our money, you ought to be able to export it. I'm not impressed by that very much. But more seriously, this is going to happen. The question is, are we going to be in it? I think if we learn from the United States, there's quite a lot to learn. For they are somehow, I was amazed when I was there 4 or 5 years ago, at the end of the last presidency, to find these buoyant people, defeatist, lost heart, hardly believed in themselves, very critical, allowing themselves to be knocked about. And now they're natural ones, their determination to press forward with what is new and creative has taken control. Or we are told they've got too much debt. They've got to spend too much money. Well, how can you have production unless you borrow the money to produce? I don't believe in the theory that you first produce and then borrow the money. That's not what my grandfather did. You borrowed the money and then produced. But anyway, this new theory, which has somehow gripped us, we ought to be afraid of things instead of pursuing them with all the energy we can. The ministers have only left us one alleviation of their austere regime. There is one new law they've invented, which is that there's no difference between capital and income. Under this law, you can spend all your capital on current account, apparently just as in the old days we used to have above and below the line. But this is a great help, because it at least gives us some alleviation from this very rigid rule. Of course, it may apply to governments, not sufficiently well up to know. It certainly doesn't apply to individuals. A lot of the nicest fellows I've known in my life have made this confusion between capital and income. But they've usually ended up in rather dreary lodging houses below. My lords, this is the test now. Let us stop these futile arguments about these purely theoretical, academic, economic arguments. Let's get back to the reality. The reality is it's happening before our eyes, happening all over the world, happening even in countries. It's incredible to us, like Taiwan and North-South Korea. You can see more modern forms of industrial production than you can see in England. It's happening. It must happen here. We must not be the slowest ship in the convoy. We must be the leader of the convoy, or at any rate make an attempt to regain the leadership we've had so long. In the next generation, it will not be for me, but for my successors, to make the decision. We just slowly, majestically sink, not perhaps drastically or tragically, but go slowly down like a great ship. Or shall we make a new, determined, united effort, putting as far as we can party aside? There must be parties, of course, but there can be cooperation. There can be even national governments. Let us do the latter. And then, the historian of the future will not describe the end of this century as the beginning of the decline and fall of Britain, but as the beginning of a new and glorious renaissance.
Stockton. Harold Macmillan, former Conservative Prime Minister.